In talking about the Irish potato famine today, I always think um, history is most interesting when you can picture yourself there, or when you can see and really see and imagine what it was like to be those people living in that time. And it's fun sometimes to read. I mean, it's, everybody reads about the presidents and the generals in the Civil War, and you read about, senators did this and the Constitutional Convention did that, and those high up people making the huge decisions. But that's a tiny sliver of humanity, and most of us are just regular citizens leading regular lives. The Irish potato famine is very easy, as we're going to read some interesting facts today, very easy to put yourself into that situation. It's not a happy situation, but something that was completely out of people's control changed history, changed certainly the history of Ireland and the history of the United States and the world, and just because of a natural thing. So let's dive in. So we're going to look at, this is not American history, but it's going to affect, immigration, basically. Spoiler alert. A lot of people leave Ireland and immigrate all around the world, and a lot come to the United States. This is in the 1840s, 1850s. So that's going to, those immigrants are going to affect the United States. And I think it's really interesting to picture yourself there and how different the world was. And now, this year, we have our own problems we're dealing with. And you can imagine how something like that would play out now. And we can actually kind of, a little bit, compare and contrast our disaster with their disaster. So we'll jump through. Let's preview it a little bit. I always think it's a good idea to read the titles and subtitles. So this is the Irish potato famine, 1845 to 1852. So think about that. That's mid 1800s. Of course, in the United States, we have the Civil War in the 1860s. So this is after the American Revolution, but not super far. This is during the time of the United States. We have Ireland in the 1800s. And a map we'll look at. Great Hunger begins. There's a graph. We'll check that out. Legacy of the potato famine and Irish hunger memorials. Something interesting at the end, I thought, that I actually came across that not too long ago. So we'll jump in. I numbered the paragraphs. We can read our way through and kind of just talk about it as we go. Have you two ladies heard of the Irish potato famine?
No, I have not.
No? Okay.
And I'm wondering why they call it potato.
Well, let's think. Okay, so Nadia hasn't heard of it. Tolulope, you have. So let's see. Tolulope, what comes to your mind? What do you know about the Irish potato famine?
Well, it's funny. A couple years ago, I read a book. Surprisingly, it was focused on African Americans at the time in Canada, but it incorporated Irish people in it who were immigrating from Ireland to Canada because of the famine. So it was obviously a disastrous time in Ireland, and so many people left their homes to move elsewhere to gain a better life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's an actual event. Okay. What caused the potato famine?
A disease with the potatoes, a disease of the potatoes.
Right. Okay.
So the disease infected the potatoes.
Yeah, exactly.
Infected people.
Well, it wasn't so much that the disease reached then the people. It was that the potato crop failed. What they say is the crop for that year, starting in 1845, the crop failed. So in the springtime, they planted all their potatoes. Through the summer and fall, they went to dig them up, And this, well, we're going to read in the introduction, a fungus-like organism, a fungus, had hit the potatoes. The potatoes grow underground. They went to dig them up. And I've read elsewhere, like the way this fungus affects a potato is just the actual potato. The green stalk and the leaves above the ground look healthy. So you're planting your potatoes, you're watering them all summer, taking care of them, whatever, being a good farmer. Summer, fall, you go to dig them up, and lo and behold, they've been struck with this fungus, and instead of a nice, healthy brown potato, it's just mush, and you can't eat it. So what I don't think this article really describes, but at the time, early, mid 1800s, people in Ireland were pretty poor. Okay, the average person was not wealthy. They didn't have all the fancy things in life. Okay, but what they did have was the white potato. When you think of just a big white potato, that's what they had. And if you're ever like told to pick one food to live off of the rest of your life, or you're going to go on a rocket ship to the moon and you can only plant one food, or there was that movie The Martian with Matt Damon several years ago. He grew potatoes. If you ever have to pick one plant, one food to live off of, period, pick the white potato. Something about the vitamins in the skin and the carbohydrates in the potato, like you can actually stay pretty healthy eating nothing but potatoes. I listened to something or read something one time. It's like if you ate nothing but potatoes for a year, you'd actually be pretty healthy. So they lived off of potatoes. Okay, the average person in Ireland. So when that's taken away from them for a couple of years in a row, several years in a row, we see 1845 to 1852, that's a problem. So the famine isn't a disease. A famine is a lack of food, right? Sometimes we put them together in our mind, but famine means a lack of food, right? People are starving and stuff. So the famine is caused by the potato crops failing because of this fungus. And it was an actual thing. It could happen today, right? We have scientists working on, keeping our crops healthy and safe, and we have genetically modified foods to help them fight different diseases and, all this and that. But there's certain things that are just out of our control as humans. And this was a case where, especially because the way it worked, it didn't affect the leaves, it affected the potato underground. And so people thought they had nice, healthy potatoes. They went to dig them up and it was just mush. So I think that's interesting. When you have, we try to protect ourselves from everything, and some things are just plain out of our control. So let's jump in. And so what, standing here in the United States, what that means is during that time, and we're going to look at this graph, during that time, you have a huge influx of immigrants from Ireland. It was a big time for immigration in general, but you have a lot of people from Ireland. Okay, so let's jump in. Paragraph 1, Irish potato famine. It says the Irish potato famine, also known as the Great Hunger, began in 1845 when a fungus-like organism called Phytophthora infestans, or P. infestans, spread rapidly throughout Ireland. The infestation ruined up to 1/2 of the potato crop that year and about 3/4 of the crop over the next 7 years. Because the tenant farmers of Ireland, then ruled as a colony of Great Britain, relied heavily on the potato as a food source, the infestation had a catastrophic impact on Ireland and its population. Before it ended in 1852, the potato famine resulted in the death of roughly 1 million Irish from starvation and related causes, with at least another million forced to leave their homelands as refugees. So needless to say, starvation is not a pleasant way to die. So this is, this is a time, if you can, we'll go into a little bit of detail. Picture yourself living there. You don't have a lot of means to get stuff. All you've got is, you're a potato farmer, or the people around, or you're a shoemaker or something. But everybody in the town is a potato farmer. If half the potato crop fails, and then 3/4 the next year, you're going to be surrounded by a lot of suffering and misery. Totolope, could you read paragraph 2?
Yes. Ireland in the 1800s. With the ratification of the Acts of Union in 1801, Ireland was effectively governed as a colony of Great Britain until its War of Independence in the early 20th century. Together, the combined nations were known as the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland. As such, the British government appointed Ireland's executive heads of state, known respectively as the Lord Lieutenant and the Chief Secretary of Ireland, although the residents of the Emerald Isle could elect representations to the Parliament of London.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, the Emerald Isle, that's a nickname for Ireland, right? Because when we think of Ireland, we think of green. Even on this map, they made it green. The Emerald Isle. So to compare, this history, we see it's a colony of Great Britain. Well, when you hear colony of Great Britain, you probably ought to think of the American colonies, which by this time had become the United States. But here's another colony of Britain. People don't like, for long periods of time, people don't like being colonists. People want their own sovereignty. They want to run their own country. They want to govern their own lives. So if you look back in history, colonies don't always work out. In fact, they've never worked out. They always cause trouble when somebody declares something a colony of their country. So, and these are, we're not British historians. I don't know what the Acts of Union were, or the Chief Secretary of Ireland, but we have enough context here to know that Great Britain was the mother country, and they took on Ireland through, whatever the Acts of Union was. They took on Ireland as a colony. And we probably ought to know, well, okay, colonies, people don't like being colonies. And we see that Britain appointed Ireland's executive heads of state. So Britain appoints the leaders of the colony, which the colonists aren't going to like. But although residents of the Emerald Isle could elect representation to Parliament in London, so that's a good thing. They can elect their own representatives to go to London in Parliament. Now, I'm no expert in Parliament, but as we're going to see in a moment, Parliament has two houses, just like we have two houses of Congress, the House of Representatives and the Senate. They have the House of Commons and the House of Lords. The House of Lords is fancier, more prestigious, kind of like our Senate. And those people are, at least traditionally, I don't know if they are at this, right now, but the House of Lords tend to be like nobility, like you pass on your noble, your name to your descendants. Those people are not elected; they're going to the House of Lords. Titled landowners, people with titles, duke and baron and things like that. Okay, so it's we don't need to know all the details here about Ireland and Britain, but I think we can pick up what we need to know. Nadia, could you read paragraph 3?
Just a moment, please.
Oh, sure. Are you driving? Are you okay?
No. Yeah, I'm okay. In all, Ireland sent 105 representatives to the House of Commons, the lower house of Parliament and 28 peers, titled landowners to the House of Lords of the upper house. Still, it's important to note that the bulk of these elected representatives were landowners of British origin and or their sons. In addition, any Irish who practiced Catholicism, the majority of Ireland's native population, were initially prohibited from owning or leasing land, voting or holding the office under the so-called penal laws.
Okay. So, we don't know what the penal laws were. Penal comes from the same word penalty. It's some penalty for being for being Catholic. Okay. When you think of the United Kingdom and especially Ireland, there's a long history in, well, much of Europe, a long history between Catholics and Protestants. And they're persecuting each other, attacking each other. There's wars fought among Christians between Catholics and Protestants, and that's very much the case in Ireland. So Britain makes it, if you were Irish and you were Catholic, you could not vote, own land, or hold elected office. Okay, so we get a glimpse of how Britain is ruling this new colony of theirs in the 1800s. Also, we saw that they're electing representation to Parliament, but what's the catch? Who are those people that are becoming their representatives?
Like they were relatives, fathers and sons.
Well, probably, yeah, they're Protestants, not Catholics. So if I'm an Irish Catholic, no Catholics are being elected to are not allowed to be elected to office. So they're certainly not Catholics. But what else is about those people being elected that maybe me as a Catholic or me as an Irish person would not like? What's the other thing that's going on? It says it's important to note that the bulk of these elected representatives were landowners of British origin and or their sons. So these weren't Irish people. Maybe they lived in Ireland, but they're people from Britain. That's like if, let's say, Canada took us over, right? And we today became colonists of Canada. And we could elect representatives to go represent us in Montreal. Is that the capital of Canada? I think Montreal. I hope it is. I don't know. But the only people that we were electing were Canadians to go represent America, right? So it's colonialism. There's some representation, but I wouldn't say it's very good representation, right? These aren't people who have Irish blood in them and have always been Irish. These are British. These are people coming from Britain and then being elected to go represent Ireland in Britain. Okay, so paragraph 4. Although the penal laws were largely repealed, cut back, taken off the books by 1829, their impact on Ireland's society and governance was still being felt at the time of the potato famine's onset. English and Anglo-Irish families owned most of the land, and most Irish Catholics were relegated to work as tenant farmers forced to pay rent to the landowners. Ironically, less than 100 years before the famine's onset, the potato was introduced to Ireland by the landed gentry. However, despite the fact that only one variety of potato was grown in the country, the so-called Irish lumper, it soon became a staple food of the poor, particularly during the cold winter months. And that's an interesting thing. Where were potatoes originally grown on Earth? Where does the potato come from? Do you know?
Was it
Uh,
it was somewhere in South America, right?
Yeah, South America, like the Incans. Um, I think I think the Incans, like in Peru. I think that's where potatoes originally came from. And there are hundreds of varieties of potato. I read a book one time called 1491, and it's about what were the Americas like before Columbus came, right? He comes in 1492, so that's why this book is called 1491. Like what was it like before Europeans came to the Americas? And there's a whole chapter about food and stuff. And they say that there's the Incas in modern day Peru, just before the the Europeans came in 1400s, 1500s. They ate a lot of potatoes. That's where potatoes are from on Earth. And they had hundreds of varieties. And, they described them. They had hundreds of words for different types of potatoes and, different ways to cook them. And, sometimes you eat them raw and this and that. And they said they had delicious, and Europeans that then went and they, after they quote unquote discovered the Americas, and they would eat the potatoes that the natives had, and they had delicious food. And somebody said that the ones that the Europeans brought back were by no means the most delicious. Like the Incas and the native Americans had tons, like big ones, small ones, all different colors. Like it's just a huge variety of potatoes. And the Europeans didn't even pick the best, most tasty ones to bring back. And if you think about it, as the big white potato that you think of in the grocery store, not very fancy. So it'd be interesting to know, go back in history and know what were those other types of potatoes. What was it? What were they like? Um, but there's really just one main type of potato grown in Ireland in that time, 1840s. Well, scientifically, and this has become a problem in other types, in other moments in history, when you have that, when there's everything's the same, well, when that fungus comes and the fungus hits that type of potato, if that type of potato is the only type around, then that means all of your potatoes are available to this fungus to take over. If they'd had a bigger variety, a genetic variety, then maybe some of more of their potatoes wouldn't have been hit. Right now, it's the same kind of thing with our corn. We think of different types of corn, but basically our corn on the cob, yellow corn, it's all very much genetically, it's very the same, very much the same. Bananas also. There's not many, there's no types of bananas. There's banana. That's the type of banana that we eat, right? There are other types of bananas, just not in our grocery stores. So there's a disease actually that's hitting bananas over the last several years, and it hasn't become a big problem. But scientists are concerned that if this banana hits our banana, if this disease hits the banana population down in the tropics where they're grown, it would be a disaster because all the bananas are exactly the same, right? There's no variety. Well, it's the same thing with the Irish potatoes. There's no variety. So this fungus comes in and targets a single type of potato, but that's all there is. So, the so-called Irish lumper, it says. So there's a problem coming. And so this paragraph describes the problem how Catholics, because of the problems we've described, Catholics were relegated to work as tenant farmers, forced to pay rent to the landowners. So you've got like a class struggle going on here. Class struggle that's defined by religion, which is historically not very good. Okay, Tolulope, could you read paragraph 5?
Yes. Great hunger begins. When the crops began to fail in 1845 as a result of pea infection, Irish leaders in Dublin petitioned Queen Victoria and Parliament to act, and initially they did, repealing the so-called Corn Laws and their tariffs on grain, which made foods such as corn and bread prohibitively expensive. Still, these changes failed to offset the growing problem of the potato blight. With many tenant farmers unable to produce sufficient food for their own consumption, and the cost of other supplies rising, thousands died of starvation and hundreds of thousands more from disease caused by malnutrition.
Okay, thank you. So I gave us a little picture of Queen Victoria. She was Queen of England for a long time. I forget exactly when, but much of the 1800s, a good long while in the 1800s. So when you talk about the 1800s, a lot of times people talk about it as the Victorian age. Or if you're talking about fashion during the 1800s, you can say Victorian fashion. It references the time when she was Queen of England. Just a way of kind of marking time. Queen Victoria. So that's her. So it says, they repealed to try to help. Parliament repealed some laws, the corn laws, which were tariffs, taxes on grain, made corn. The tariffs had made corn and bread prohibitively expensive. What does it mean, prohibitively?
Not acceptable.
Yeah, okay. If something is prohibited, what does that mean?
Forbidden.
Forbidden. Okay, it's not allowed. So prohibitively expensive means it's so expensive that it's basically like blocking people from doing it. It's almost like it's not allowed, right? You can buy corn and bread, but there's such high taxes on it. Let's say a $1 loaf of bread costs $3 and you don't have $3. It's prohibitively expensive. It's going to prevent you from doing it. Okay, so that's a good word to be aware of. Prohibitively expensive. People always talk about prohibitively expensive. You could say something's prohibitively difficult, right? If something is doable but it's very difficult to do, a lot of times in government, if you got to fill out a lot of paperwork and get a permit and pay a fee or something, it's prohibitively difficult to do. Okay, so that's a good word. It's not prohibited, but it might as well be because it's so hard to do, or it's so expensive. So that's a good word. So Parliament tried to help. It says still these changes failed to offset the growing problem of the potato blight. When 50% of the potatoes fail, you go to dig them up and they're inedible, they're mush. 50% in the first year, 3/4 most years for the next 7. You can lower the tax on grain all you want, but most of people, if they relied heavily on the potato, you can't, unless you're going to replace the potatoes with something else. It's not going to do any good. And the costs of other supplies rising. Okay, thousands died of starvation and hundreds of thousands more from disease caused by malnutrition. Again, lots and lots and lots of just suffering. And what I did was, to find these pictures, I just Googled Irish potato famine. And I don't know, I can't say that, it's just a Google search, but I can't say where all the pictures come from, but there are a lot of sketch drawings of just people dressed in tatters shredded clothing and skinny, lots of ribs, lots of skinny everything, their hair's falling out. So maybe some of that is kind of exaggerated for dramatic effect. I don't know exactly the background of these pictures, just a Google search. But there's a lot of pictures. If you Google Irish potato famine, there was misery and suffering. Nadia, could you read paragraph 6?
Just a moment, please.
Okay.
Complicating matters further, historians have since concluded was that Ireland continued to export large quantities of food, primarily to Great Britain during the Blight. In cases such as livestock and butter, research suggests that exports may have actually increased during the potato famine. In 1847 alone, records indicate that commodities such as peas, beans, rabbits, fish, and honey continued to be exported from Ireland, even as the Great Hunger ravaged the countryside.
Okay, thank you. So there's other food, they don't just eat potatoes in Ireland, and exports of those other foods, it says livestock, butter, peas, beans, rabbits, fish, honey, those actually go up. They continue to be exported, and they may have, it says, actually have increased, which seems like just a tragedy, just a crime that you would be, with people starving to death, that you would be exporting food. So let's think of a reason. Why would that be? If I'm if I grow livestock, if I'm a farmer and I have a herd of cattle for, beef or whatever, why might I choose, because economics is all decisions, people choosing to do things. Why would I choose to maybe sell more overseas, to export more during the potato famine? What would be the cause of me deciding to do that?
Money, because probably prices increased, so they could make more money.
Okay. Right. Do the people in Ireland, okay, so let's say I'm a livestock farmer and you are potato farmers. Your potato crop failed, so you can't sell it, right? You can't eat it. If you're a subsistence farmer who, that's what's called when you grow your own food. You can't, you're going to starve because you don't have your own potatoes. If you're a farmer that sells potatoes, you now don't have any potatoes to sell, which means you're not making any money, which means what for me? If I sell beef and you don't make any money from uh, selling potatoes, can you buy my beef?
No,
No.
these people could not buy this, so
Yeah.
if my goal is to make money, I wanted to sell this to people who have money.
Mm-hmm. Right. So you have exports continue or even possibly increase, because maybe I sell, 100 beef cattle a month or a year or whatever, 50% locally in Ireland and 50% overseas, exported to maybe Britain or France. Well, now nobody Irish is buying my beef, so I got to take that 50% and I got to sell that export as well. So, and that happens. That happens all the time in history. You have famines, and people continue to sell out, export the food that they do have, and you got to think, well, why? Right? It seems terrible. It seems like an awful thing to do. How could you do such a thing during a famine in your own country? But if my goal if I give away my cattle, maybe you get to live, but then I'm starving because I don't get paid for my stuff. So, people, it's just a crappy situation all around, really. But that's kind of in the very basic level, that's what's going on there. We think it's, a selfish, terrible crime. How could you be exporting food? Well, I'm exporting food because nobody has money to buy my food, right?
But that's why we have government. The government supposed to buy this food for the prices people wanted to sell, and then government supposed to help their nation, their people, not to die.
Yeah, yeah. And that's the case today. I mean, you have all kinds, even more than we can even know. Just sitting here in Pennsylvania, around the country, you have the government buying up food, and it happens all the time with all different crops. You have, if there's a soy farmers, or let's say potato farmers, if they have a surplus, in order to, they have more potatoes than Americans are going to buy this year, the government will come in and buy those extra potatoes in order to help the farmers and help the prices stay stable and stuff. That happens all the time. But we're talking the 1840s, and this is a different time. Government was much smaller, much simpler then. There may have been some of that, but back then, and really you could argue up until very recently, the last 50 years, 100 years in American society, when people were starving on the streets in America, in cities in America, or in the Irish potato famine, it wasn't the government's job to help people. That's not how they viewed government. I mean, we say that now, and Nadia, you make a great point, but you make that point sitting here in 2020 because that's how you understand government. You feel that that's a job that the government's supposed to do. Back then, in England, in the 1840s, and throughout much of history, people would say, no, that's not, government's not supposed to give food to starving people. No, 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 that doesn't happen. So it's just a different perspective. Things change, political ideas change over time. So it's interesting that you say that, and maybe that, I have a very, maybe a simplistic view of things, but I think my guess is that back then in England, 170 years ago, um, they wouldn't have agreed with you. That you would have said that, and they'd say, "No, that's not for government to do. Buy people's food and hand it out to poor people. No, no, no." You know what I mean?
Yeah, I understand.
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, we.
That's what happened in the sorry. That's what happened in the Soviet Union, but actually not because um, something was wrong with what people planted.
Mhm.
It's because government sold the food outside the country, and
Mm.
government took away everything from people. And I think millions and millions Ukrainian people died because of that.
Yeah. And that happens too in authoritarian governments and communist governments. People think that, and there's some, historical reason. People fear communism because yeah, you have people starving in your country, but the government is selling its food for economic reasons, or maybe not necessarily evil, bad reasons, but yeah, you have people starving in your country, in Russia, in Ukraine, and the government, if you look, the government is selling its food overseas, exporting food while their people starve. And it happens through history. It happened thousands of years ago, and it happens even now. People look at North Korea. We don't know much about North Korea. It's a very closed country. But my understanding is the average people like you and me in North Korea are very poor, but their government is doing just fine. and exports, sells a lot overseas, and does not take care of its people, you know. So no, there's a lot of connection there. Okay, so that's a little bit of economics there. Paragraph 7, the potato crops didn't fully recover until 1852. So this didn't last forever. It was really 8 years. Okay, less than a decade. By then, the damage was done. Although estimates vary, it is believed that as many as 1 million Irish men, women, and children perished during the famine, and another 1 million emigrated from the island to escape poverty and starvation, with many landing in various cities throughout North America and Great Britain. Okay, and here's a graph. Let me zoom in just a bit here. So here's a graph of Irish U.S. immigrants by year. And sure enough, the biggest spike of all, this is what do we got? The vertical axes, we have 50,000 people, 100,000 people, 200,000 people. You know, let me zoom in one more here. Was it 1848, 49? 45 to 52 is the Irish potato famine, and that does it. That's it right there, all those big spikes. Now look at 1853, 50, whatever that year might be, 54. What do you think happens? Look how tiny that bar is. What do you think caused that? Do you think people just stopped coming to America after the potato crop bounced back in 1853?
Or what if the law has changed and they could not?
Yeah. You have 1845, 1852, Irish potato famine. Incidentally, I don't know I think it's just coincidence that the potatoes recovered in 1853 crop. Right at that time, 53, 54, I don't know exactly when, but America just got tired of so many immigrants. And there was a lot of European immigration at this time. Now this is just this graph just gives us Ireland, but immigration was very big. You figure it must have been in those early years of the United States, because unless you're Native American, you're coming from an immigrant background, right? No matter what your skin color, if you're not Native American, you are a descendant of immigrants at some point. So, but in the mid 1800s, European immigration was very high. In a lot of cities, if you walk down the street, most of the people you would pass were not born in the United States. And so around that time, I don't know, I don't remember if it was Congress or if a law was passed exactly, but some action was taken that severely limited immigration. Not just, I don't believe just from Ireland. I think it was across the board, I think. But clearly something happened, because look at up, and then a little bit down. Okay, so less people are choosing to come. Maybe that's natural. That's a good thing. But then, bam, almost, very, very few. So, all of a sudden that would tell us something. Then it recovers a little bit. So I wonder what happened there, it goes up above 50,000. But clearly, just looking at this, even, if it appears on the test for you, clearly something happened. Okay, the legacy of the potato famine. The exact role of the British government in the potato famine and its aftermath, whether it ignored the plight of Ireland's poor out of malice, or if their collective inaction and inadequate response could be attributed to incompetence, is still being debated. However, the significance of the potato famine, or in the Irish language, an gorta mór, in Irish history, and its contribution to the Irish diaspora of the 19th and 20th centuries is beyond doubt. So the cause, whether the British acted out of malice or incompetence, is still being debated. Incompetence means, you're no good at your job. What is malice?
I don't know.
I should know, but I don't.
That's a good, same root word as malicious. If somebody acts very maliciously or acts out of malice, it means, with bad intent, evil, bad. So did the British government fail really in its response to the potato famine out of malice? Did they do it on purpose, or were they just bad at responding to this disaster, incompetence? Okay, but whether or not it was done on purpose or not, its significance, it says, is beyond doubt. Now, there's another word here, diaspora. This isn't a huge word that pops up in life much, but it's an interesting word. The Irish diaspora. Sometimes, okay, so there's two other diasporas that come to mind. The Irish diaspora of the 19th and 20th
population of some from some country like Russian diaspora.
Oh yeah, I think we have talked about diaspora, the Russian diaspora. Okay, so what does it mean, the Russian diaspora?
People who came from Russia and lived together in some places.
Okay, in different places. They're not in Russia, outside of Russia, no. Right?
Yes, but who came here to the United States and live here. So we call it like Russian diaspora. All of them speak Russian. All of them came from Russia. Sometimes they choose the same area to live.
Mm-hmm. Right. Okay. So it's a specific group, the Irish, the Russians. People talk about the African, historians sometimes talk about the African diaspora. If you think of all the people, the African Americans, people of African descent around the world, who were spread largely through, not through immigration, but through forced immigration of slavery, much of the time. The African diaspora is an interesting way to think of that. Everybody of that group that has been spread for lots of different reasons, spread around the world. So the Irish diaspora, the effect of the potato famine on the Irish diaspora. The reason, it's the one reason that a lot of people during that period of the 1840s, 1850s were spread around the world. So that's not a word that pops up a lot, but it's an interesting idea. Says Tony Blair, during his time as Prime Minister, issued a statement in 1997 offering a formal apology, interesting, to Ireland for the UK government's handling of the crisis at the time. So this is a big deal. I mean, it clearly affects the United States in immigration. And we could, you could study all kinds of history about how violently poorly Irish were treated in the United States. Irish immigrants were hated. I don't really know why. I think a lot of them were Catholic, and that was also a time when even in the United States, Catholics were not always treated well. They came, and the same complaints that people have today about immigrants. They're different, their language is different, they're taking our jobs, this and that. America, for a country that's built on the backs of immigrants, we have a long history of hating immigrants, even though it's basically immigrants hating immigrants. But the Irish were treated terribly, terribly in the United States, Irish immigrants. And this is one thing, this last thing is, these pictures are something I came across, I think within the last year. I heard about it somewhere, heard about it on a podcast or something I was listening to. Irish hunger memorials. It says, in recent years, cities to which the Irish ultimately emigrated during and in the decades after the event have offered various commemorations to the lives lost. Boston, New York City, Philadelphia, and Phoenix, Arizona, I guess, in the United States, as well as Montreal and Toronto in Canada, have erected Irish hunger memorials, as have various cities in Ireland, Australia, and Great Britain. Australia also, you say Australia, why Australia? Australia was a British colony for much of its history. So it's within that British world. So maybe a lot of Irish people, made their way to Australia. These two pictures are of the Irish Hunger Memorial in New York City. I don't know exactly where it is in New York City, but it's clearly on the Hudson River. And it's just a little plot of land, and they maybe 10 years old. I don't think it's very old. And they got an architect, and look, they like built a hill, and you can see how kind of see how it's made out of concrete. And if you Google it, it's New York City, New York Irish Hunger Memorial. I think it's really cool. It'd be really cool to go. It's made to look like Ireland from the 1840s, 1850s. It's nice stone walls, lots of grass, native Irish plants. I'm sure some plaques and information and things, but it's meant to be like a little piece of Ireland in the middle of New York City. I think it's kind of neat. Okay, so we got in a chart. We saw a map. We didn't actually really look at that map, but we got a map. We got some questions. We got a chart. Got some economics talk in there. So a pretty good just overall discussion of social studies, the Irish potato famine. Any questions or thoughts before we wrap up?
No, thank you.
No? Tolulope, any ideas? Any questions?
No, I don't think so. But I do want to say that the book I was mentioning, it was really well done, I think, because um it kind of combined two different historical events um and two different perspectives, and um I just think it was very well written, how it incorporated um the perspectives of immigrants as well as former slaves, all trying to find a better life in a new country that neither had been in before, and how both could relate to each other with their struggles of hunger and such of this sort, and how they later on became friends. I thought it was outstanding.
Yeah, that would be a good story to tie together. That's cool. Cool. All right. Well, the Irish potato famine. Like I said at the beginning, it's an interesting moment in history. It's very easy to picture yourself there. Starvation. It's not a good thing, but it's easy to understand. Some of these political things and wars and this and that. It's hard to understand. Is a war good or is a war bad? But like the Irish potato famine is pretty easy to understand. There's a fungus, the crops died, and people starved because they didn't have anything to eat. So it's pretty straightforward. And I think it's interesting, to then picture those people then traveling overseas, arriving in America, starting new lives in Canada, like you said, forming friendships even, and parallel experiences with slaves, former slaves. That's pretty cool. It's cool. So, well, I appreciate you two especially. We've had other people pop in throughout the weeks here, but I appreciate you logging in every week. I hope that our discussions have helped you. Tolulope, good luck on your test. I hope that really goes well. Send me an email and let me know how it turns out for you.
Yeah, we'll do.
Yeah. So have a good month or two here, and I'll be in touch when we fire it back up for the fall. And if you two are, if you've moved on, certainly totally Lope. If you've certainly moved on, then that's fine. But I'll keep your email on my list. And yeah, I look forward to talking to you again then.
Yeah.
Have a great summer.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for your lesson.
No, it's been a pleasure. It's been a pleasure. You two you've provided a lot of really interesting conversations. Thank you. So, all right. Well, we can log off. Thank you very much. Have a great day. Totolope, Nadia, thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. See you later in a few months.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye bye.